We welcome you to turn on your video if you are able to. There's a lot of good reasons to have video off, but it does help all of us be engaged if we can see each other's faces. We would love to see yours.
I'm going to make my gallery bigger so I can see more people when they turn their cameras on. That's fun.
There we go.
It looks like we've got a few more folks coming in, but I'm just gonna get rolling so we can get through introductions as folks trickle into the Zoom room. My name is Catherine. I am going to sort of serve as moderator for what we visioned as a roundtable, and we're going to pretend we're around a roundtable instead of in the Zoom box today. But we're all from the University of Washington and want to talk a bit about community engaged learning across the disciplines today. Really kind of pointing toward the conference theme of equitable regenerative economies. We're going to talk about a number of courses that have a community engagement component at University of Washington, as well as some of the philosophy and structure behind those courses. So let's see if I can get my slides to move forward. These are your presenters. We're all here in the room today, and we're going to be able to tell you a bit more about ourselves in a moment. I just want to start though with a land and labor acknowledgement. Right, we all benefit from people who have stewarded the lands where we are for generations. And I invite you, if you don't already know, to visit nativeland.ca and learn more about the land where you are, where you live, work, and play. And because I live just a few blocks up from South Seattle Community College, where for Omicron, we would all be together. I wanted to acknowledge that I often join these meetings from as an uninvited guest from the traditional homeland of the Duwamish people, and that despite a treaty, 100-plus-year-old treaty that says they should be recognized as a tribe, they are still not recognized by the federal government. And so I'm just pointing to the Real Rent Duwamish site as a means of reparation, right, for the stewardship and gift of that land and space that I benefit from. And particularly as a white identified person, I also want to acknowledge how much I benefit from the uncompensated labor of enslaved Black folks and the subjugation of people all over the world through settler colonialism. And those are heavy ways to start a conversation, but they're really important to the work that we all do together that we want to talk to you about. And so that's just sort of where I wanted to start us. I'm happy to talk more about land and labor acknowledgements. It is definitely a place of learning for me, trying to get past sort of the PAT signature line that my university provides. And I know not every university or institution even provides those like boilerplate words. So just it's a practice I'm trying to develop, and happy to talk more with folks if you are also developing your own practice and want to think together about it, how to make it authentic and real. I'm going to toss to my colleagues, and we're going to tell you a bit about who we are, the places we hold at the university, and the courses that we teach, since that's good foundational context for what we'll do together today and the rest of the session. Anju, you're first alphabetically.
Right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. We appreciate you taking time. My name is Anjali Gunty, and I'm coming to you from Duwamish territory and what's now called Ballard. I've lived here, 21 years, and I'm blessed to be a guest on these lands. And I grew up here too. So I'm glad when it rains and I get to walk through the woods. So in our program, we are the public health, global health major at the University of Washington School of Public Health, where we have about 600 students, 80% of which are BIPOC. I take 300 students a year during their senior year, and I teach a capstone course, which is a culminating experience. And the service learning is a requirement for their course. And in terms of our, it's a theory to practice class. There's all these words here, but really what's happening is I want students to be really knowledgeable about who it is, what they're learning, and how they're applying what they're learning. So the main bit here is they need to identify theories as they think about how they're doing their public health practice. The theories that they learn in class are all equity centered, and we'll talk about that momentarily. Did I do all the things, Catherine? Okay.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Christian Love. I'm currently a PhD candidate at UW Seattle College of Education. I also serve as the program manager for the Othello UW Commons. The Othello UW Commons is the UW South Seattle Learning Collaboration space where we do programming and workshops and host courses and various events for students, community members, and faculty and staff in the South Seattle area. But the course I teach is an intro to education course. It's the acronym Intro to ECO. It's 100 students per quarter, 3 credits, lecture style. There is a requirement for CELI for community engaged learning work, and we do have designated sites for those students or self-placement. And the learning objectives, it's all about kind of these intro theories for ecology, for critical race theory, and ways in which students can really highlight their own identities and how those identities can serve as assets in their community engaged work. Lots of reflection throughout the quarter based on that community engaged experience and how this intro course can evolve into a long-term career in teaching, early ed, community-based experiences, higher education, et cetera. Happy to be here. Happy Thursday.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you, Catherine, for moderating. My name is Christy Strauss. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an associate teaching professor in the program on the environment. And the program on the environment is the University of Washington's Environmental Studies major. And there I have the opportunity to develop and teach quite a variety of courses, all of which intersect with sustainability and justice. I've given the students the option of learning with community partners through community engaged learning for years in several classes. And today I'm focused on Environment 239, which is called Sustainability, Personal Choices, Broad Impacts. This course is taught every quarter. It has 5 credits, lecture and discussion to about 80 students per quarter. Students and majors all across campus take it. So some of our environmental studies majors take it and other students take it to fulfill a UW distribution requirement or just because they're interested. My learning objectives for the class are on the slide here, but I do really want students to understand some definitions and models of sustainability, deepen their content knowledge about the socioeconomic environmental challenges that we face, and understand the systems that are at root, the systemic challenges that we are facing. And articulate importance, challenges, and limits of sustainable consumption. So it's really based on individual choices. So thinking about what are the limits of that, and gain insight into becoming more of a sustainable citizen. Students in the class engage with sustainability in a lot of ways, some through community engaged learning, all of them through doing things in their own lives to engage with sustainability. So you see the pictures on this slide there are students carrying bags because one of their first assignments is to carry their own garbage and recycling for a week and then reflect on what they learn about our system and their behaviors in that process. I'm super happy to be here with you today, and I look forward to chatting with my co-presenters and hopefully you too. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eli, and it's such an honor to be here with all of you and listening to these wonderful courses and all the different ways that we're working, in different perspectives into this question of community engaged learning and how that intersects with sustainability and justice. And I think in a lot of the classes that I teach in my role as an assistant teaching professor in the environmental studies program, is around these ideas of sustainability and justice. And I get to teach classes on structural changes in society that could help us move to a more sustainable relationship with the planet and each other. But I also get to teach a lot of classes on food systems because that's kind of my focus. And so the course that I'm going to talk most about today is a class called Environment 240, the urban farm. And it's sort of like such an easy way to get, it's a kind of a low hanging entry point into community engaged learning, in that really this class is about practice, right? It's just about getting our hands in the dirt and learning what it means to form a relationship with place through the activities of growing food. And that can have really deep and transformative impacts on students as they really get into understanding how they change when they get involved in the work of food production and food preparation. So it really is a class that helps students get into the work of growing food. The community engaged learning part helps students get out beyond the edges of the university, out into the community, working with other organizations that are doing amazing work in urban food systems and urban food production. And all of that helps build a city that is more resilient when it comes to food and community health. So it's a wonderful class. I love teaching it. I love the community engaged learning aspect of it. And over the course of the history that I've had with this class, like the community engaged learning part has kind of gotten more and more central to what the class does.
I love hearing about all these classes that my office gets a chance to support. Again, my name is Catherine Perch-Cornforth. I use she, her pronouns, and my position at the university is Director of Community Engagement. I am in a central unit, kind of an office that supports community engagement and leadership education across the undergrad curriculum. We call ourselves the Selly Center because that's just a little bit shorter. And my position, my portfolio kind of includes support for courses like the 4 you just heard about that have a community engagement or service learning component. I also run some fellowship programs. These goobers making faces at you from the photos are some students from my fellowship program, some of my fellowship programs, really kind of building civic leadership and public service career pathways for undergraduates, no matter their major, right? And as well as exposing students to kind of these ideas and concepts. Occasionally I get the chance to teach myself, mostly under the general studies heading, focusing on kind of career connectedness or critical perspectives on community engagement, which draws kind of from my larger project. I'll tell you more about the UW broadly and then the Selly Center specifically, just because I think it helps kind of understand some of the support that is available for instructors at our Seattle campus. UW is big, decentralized, right? We're research intensive university. No one is required to come through the Selly Center for community engagement support, right? We try to offer some connections to the larger field and introduction to community engaged pedagogy, as well as occasionally presentation or publication support. We have fits and starts of offering faculty learning communities, but not a lot of funding to do that, right? So it sort of happens as we have faculty that are interested and kind of move it forward. We also try to provide a connection point, like a front porch, if you will, for community partners who want to connect with this big decentralized place that can be really challenging to navigate. So we want to connect with programs within our own center, right? There are 7 or 8 programs within the Selly Center where community partners might engage students, but also with colleagues across campus who are running similar programs, right? Or maybe if an undergrad from Christy's course isn't quite the right fit for a project, maybe there's a master's student in the School of Public Policy and Governance that is a good fit for it, right? And we can help facilitate some of those connections. And then we also kind of serve as a relationship management data gathering function for the university, right? Our center led the process of the University of Washington, Seattle, getting the Carnegie Community Engagement Classification, which is an elective classification that we opted for based on how deeply community engagement and civic leadership development is embedded across the undergraduate curriculum, right? We sort of collated the data and the examples and applied to the Carnegie Foundation, and were recognized for that just weeks before everything shut down. So we never got to celebrate properly, but someday we'll rewind to February 2020 and have that party. And one thing I wanted to note, some of you may know the work here at University of Washington under a different name. For about 25 years, we had a center on campus called the Carlson Center, the Carlson Leadership and Public Service Center. That's actually where I started working when I came to the university from my early career in nonprofit management. But around the beginning of 2020, we were starting to talk a bit, right? So programs that had historically had different reporting lines came together as the Selly Center in 2018, and took a couple, you know, how things go when organizations reorganize. It took a little bit of time for us to get our footing with each other. But one of the early conversations we had was about shared values. I'll actually go to the next slide so you can see a bit more of Selly Center as I talk. Some conversations about shared values. One of those things was it would be good if we had a shared name. So we have gradually let go of all of the pre-existing names. So the Carlson Center is a legacy program, but not a name we use anymore because those programs have been absorbed into the larger Selly Center with these shared values of cultural humility, racial equity, authentic relationships, and reflective learning. One of the other language changes, not just in our name, that came out of that values-centered conversation was a shift away from service learning toward community-engaged learning. And it's just semantics, right? It's the words we use, but there is some purpose behind that shift, right? If we are thinking about sustainable regenerative economies, we have to let go of words that collect baggage, sometimes unintended baggage along the way. And service learning had sort of collected that, right? It started absolutely with great intentions, but early on in its practice was a reinforcement of privilege, right? Sending students who we presumed had privilege into communities to serve people who we presumed did not have privilege. And even though there's been a lot of critical work in the field, I'm going to shout out to Tania Mitchell and just introducing the term critical service learning, we were finding that with both faculty and students, that terminology didn't necessarily encapsulate what it was that we were trying to do. And so as a campus, we have shifted to community engaged learning. I think today you'll hear all of us use those two terms interchangeably. For me, because it's 15 years of habit that isn't going to unfurl in 2 years, but also because some of our instructors have also been teaching service learning courses for years and are making the shift with us gradually. I invite you to learn more about the Selly Center and our programs, to connect with us if you have similar programs at your university or want to create similar programs. I'll put our website on this slide, just cele.uw.edu, so you can learn a bit more about us, and some more about our history and context and strategic direction is on that About page that I've linked there. We're going to ask you to take a moment. Actually, I'm not going to show you our questions yet. Hopefully you didn't memorize them all four. We're going to ask you to take just a moment right now and jot down a couple of things that you're hoping to get out of this session, right? Why did you choose this of the 4 options that you had at 11 a.m.? Because we're pretty adaptive, and we want to, in a few minutes, we're going to ask you to share those with us. Not yet though. Don't press enter if you type anything in chat. But just jot down a couple of things that you want to get out of the session, and then we'll ask you to contribute that in a few moments. I'm imagining like the pencil scratching against paper that we would have if we were all in the same room. Okay, those moments of silence are one of the hardest things for me to facilitate as an instructor. It's even harder on Zoom because I can't, I can't read folks in the same way. So thanks for taking a moment of just that reflection and kind of grounding. Um, as we launch into our first question and have participants answer that first question. These are the rest of the questions that we are mapping out for the conversation today. And so as you're listening on with one ear, if you could also just compare what we're planning in terms of conversation with what you want to get out of the session. After we've gone through sort of the slides for this first question, we'll ask you to share with us a bit more about what you want to get out of the conversation and adapt from there. All right. So who are your intellectual ancestors? What are the theoretical underpinnings for your course? So as I give Andrea a chance to take a breath and enroll to her slides, I'll just again note Dr. Tania Mitchell and the concept of critical service learning. She published her dissertation the first year that I worked at the University of Washington. And so I was lucky to read it very early in my journey with this kind of pedagogy and doing this formal work on campus. I think her 2012 article, Service Learning as a Pedagogy of Whiteness, has also been really formational for me. And then David Donahue, who has worked at several institutions in the San Francisco Bay Area, has also just done some really lovely work, I think particularly reflecting on his own positionality as a white queer practitioner doing this work and some of the complications of those identities in doing community engagement work from an ethical standpoint. So that's who I would contribute to the conversation. And Anju, can you tell us a bit about your intellectual ancestors?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think for me, I've been really blessed to get to be with a lot of Native folks growing up and in my sort of sensory brain forming time in college. And so that's a lot of what I bring in. And when things are just hard being a teacher and you're like, what am I teaching and what am I doing? I go to the water. And so this kind of will flow into the second part of your question, Catherine, where this whole COVID thing happened. I don't know if y'all heard of it. And when that was on, I had, I think 150 students who needed to graduate and had to have a capstone experience. And I lost 100 capstone placements. And I was like, oh my God. I think I might have called you crying, Catherine. I don't remember, but I feel like I freaked out. Anyway, so like all that happened. And then I remembered, you know, what's been here the whole time. Trees have been here the whole time. Mountains have been here the whole time. And they've seen everything and they're not going anywhere. And I said, well, I'm going to do what I'm always told to do, which is to go to the water, go to the land, go to the trees, and figure out what to do. And the thing I remembered is that public health, and I'm a social work and public health person. And the coolest things about these two disciplines is that they rely on other disciplines. We rely on psych, we rely on econ, we rely on poli-sci, we rely on all of our people who are taking care and making better our food systems, because we can't nourish our families if we can't nourish our own bodies, right? And we would have all kinds of problems. And so I looked at these estuaries and I was like, yo, the answer's in the Salish Sea. What am I thinking? It's right here, which is that this brackish water, which, you know, one part public health or social work and one part another discipline, can come together to make me say, I can come up with a class with anything I want, because whatever is happening is going to support our students to understand sustainability. They're going to understand what it means to sort of create the society that's going to help other parts of our society and our plants and trees be okay. So next slide, please. And so that takes me to sort of these like, I grew up as a dancer. I grew up doing Indian classical dance. So when I think and teach, I think like a dancer. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about was just how service learning is it's the soundtrack. It's our music. It's how we're going to do this class. It's all of the kind of the beat that we're moving to. And then when I think about the next part of what you need for a dance program is you need dance moves. And so, so next slide, Catherine. So when you think about these dance moves and who are my intellectual ancestors and who do I bring into the classroom, there's Tania right there, if you want to point to her, Catherine. Who I bring into the classroom to talk about this work are all of these people. Right. So we can't have critical anything without the great Derek Bell, who's sort of I do tarot as well, who I think of as sort of the emperor, who's kind of the crown of all of this work. And these are all of the theories that I have the students learn. And NextJazz has pictured all of the people who I've mentioned here that support our students in being able to apply theory to practice and to always have a social justice lens. And to always know that whatever they do has a reaction, and that we want that reaction to be a positive one. We want the outcome to be a positive one. And so I have all of these folks in here who I call our dance moves, and I tucked Prince in there as well, because I don't know how to get through a week without Prince, to be honest. All right, so these are our dance moves. And then I think about, well, okay, I've got music, I've got dance moves, but like, how am I moving? How am I dancing? Well, this is our choreography. And Marion Bogo, who developed this a gazillion years ago for the field of social work. Social work is my home discipline, and it's a thing that bails me out every time. And with social work, she has this, what's called the ITP loop. And what I do with the students is I have them retrieve information, reflect upon it, link it to the capstone experience that they're doing, and then have a professional response. What is that professional response? It could be having a meeting. It could be making an infographic. It could be creating a podcast. It could be any of those things. And then I have the students loop and do it over and over and over and over again, so that they kind of get that practice of having that lens. Like, I want it in them. So one of the greatest compliments a student can ever give me is, this feels kind of repetitive. And I'll be like, yeah, because it's a practice. And so I am thrilled that it feels repetitive, because it should. And this is what I want you doing. And each time I want you to make it feel repetitive, but just find the nuances and the differences, so that you can see how what you're working with links to this estuary. That's all I want you to do. And I want you to see how certain plants and animals that live in this part of our estuary in the Salish Sea can't live over here. And why is that? And that's why you keep going through this practice to figure that out. So that's kind of what holds my class as I think about what it is that I want public health students to understand about how they need to be thinking about vaccine deployment and all of these things in a way that doesn't compromise the health and well-being of others, but instead improves people's health. So that's my answer to your question, Catherine. I hope I got it all. You tell me.
Well, I'm bopping to Prince in my mind now.
As you should. And I know that Christian's got some other theories in here that he's wanted to throw out there to folks that make a lot of sense.
I'll try to hit your slide transitions, Christian, but give me a nudge if I need it.
Sounds good. Thank you, Anju. Thank you, Catherine. Again, my course is an intro to education course. Just for some context, the College of Ed has 2 current majors in education, working on a third. I also have a minor, but students do have to take a series of intro courses to apply for the major in order to have that be a part of their career exploration and academic experience at UW Seattle. But one theory that I do touch on within the Intro to Eco course is on ecological theory. As you can see here at the graphic, it goes through a series of systems, from individual to microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, and macrosystem. But in terms of the actual experience and in the course project, students in the past have talked about that this theory can be quite heavy and quite dense. How can we actually apply this to our own lives and think about it from our own lived experiences, our own identities? So we actually started the project a couple of years ago, and the students created a visual model, and they use images, graphs, quotes to represent those influences on each ecological system. And we categorize 10 for the micro, macro, exo, 5 for the meso. And we've had students do presentations, prezis, videos, Microsoft Word, summaries in order to really highlight the theory that they're working with throughout the course of the quarter. Next slide, Catherine, please. So in thinking about identity, in week 1 or 2, I usually do an identity wheel here as listed. And this looks at and talks about how do students visualize their privilege and oppression. So when thinking about these 6 categories of race, gender, class, sexual orientation, religion, ability, students can then really understand how they situate themselves with community engaged work and within an academic setting, how that impacts their lived experience, how that shapes how they go into communities and impact those individual community-based organizations, those schools, those nonprofits. So during that first week or 2, we highlight this. We place a dot on the spoke there. So the example listed here is my own example. For my race being Black African American, definitely an oppressed identity based on years of history and civil rights and slavery, et cetera. Identify as a cisgender male, so very privileged identity. Class is always an interesting one for me because I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, low-income experience, low-income family, single-parent household. But now my wife and I are here in Seattle. We're homeowners. We both have great careers thus far. We're a family of 4, so we're steadily growing. So that's always one that I'm toggling between. Do I highlight my former past familial history? Do I highlight my current active family here in Seattle? So we do this in small groups, highlight those respective identities, and then students can have a better understanding of how they fit within this dynamic of privilege and oppression, but also how they can navigate to navigate space for the community engaged experiences. And the final slide I have here is on Yaso's model of community cultural wealth. This is one I also use for my dissertation that I'm currently finishing, hoping to get done sometime this late spring, early summer. But this really highlights these respective assets and skill sets and the various capital that students bring to the classroom. It helps them think about their own narratives or histories and how that can really shape their student engaged, community engaged experience. So there's 6 listed here. There's aspirational, familial, social, navigational, resistant, and linguistic. The aspirational being these goals that students set in order to highlight and push towards those goals in school, the familial being how can family history, family values shape their student experience. The social is all about the groups and individuals that they that they are supporting and helping support their college going experience. The navigational being is various resources that students can tap into at their respective college university. Resistant is really rooted in how students can push back on these heteronormative white dominant norms in order to really highlight change and push back on those various dynamics. And then linguistic being how students bring students the language to the classroom, can be multilingual, and often talk about how students code switch within formal and informal settings as well. So those are just three of the different theories and activities that I do bring to class. I'm happy to highlight more as well through our presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. I think Eli, talk to us about regenerative economies and how do you bring us to the topic for our presentation?
All right, so it's very important for you all to understand that I come into this from the perspective of a farmer. And in agricultural systems, one of the really important developments that's happening now is agriculturalists are really beginning to adopt a vision for agricultural production that is really focused on regenerative work. And this word regenerative builds towards approaching food production not in an extractive way, but in a way that is in partnership, in particular with soils, but other pieces of ecosystems as well, including the broader community context in which a farm is set. And it's really interesting that, you know, Christian is talking about Yoso's model of community cultural wealth and how strongly that links onto what is a regenerative economy, right? Like, that's so cool. Because like, what is a regenerative economy? Just like what is a regenerative agricultural system? A regenerative economy is really moving beyond these sort of band-aid solutions for what is sustainable, but going more deeply into the structural changes, the changes in how we understand what wealth is and what the goal of wealth is. That if the point of our work is to generate cultural and community wealth, that really reframes the whole idea of what a profession is, right? That is a transformative shift. And that is the kind of shift that I'm all about wanting to teach into. That's the kind of shift I really want my students to leave my classes thinking about. I don't want to help my students do a better job doing things the way we're doing them now. I want to invite my students into imagining doing a better job in a system that doesn't exist yet. And that is a system with a regenerative economy. And so there are some different ways we might begin to understand what is a regenerative economy. And it's a new idea. It's not something that is broadly being talked about in academic circles, but this idea that what we're doing is sort of moving across scales from kind of personal to community to broader scales, using regenerative investments. So thinking about how we're actualizing our actual monetary wealth and using that to regenerate, building towards cultural and community wealth. Thinking about the outputs of our systems, like are those outputs that are helping build health broadly, you know, in broad ways. Thinking about kind of mutualism and values and how we work together. And then how we bring that all back together in collective learning. So this is a sort of model that comes out of a more recent work. It was published in 2019, sort of thinking about how do we measure regenerative economics, right? Because right now we have these very clear structural goals of how we understand what is success in a traditional economic way. But we need to develop new goals, right? If we're about transformation, we have to have ways to measure our success and to think into that. So I'm pretty excited to be thinking about these ideas with my students in some of the courses I think, and beginning to apply those in practice with students through community engaged learning.
I don't to brag, I have such a cool job because I get to work with all of you and you're all so rad. Right, I think one of the joys for me is talking with students in other contexts, and they'll be like, oh, I had this really great class about urban farming. I'm like, oh, Eli, right? Like in making those connections. And listening, even after, prepping for this conversation, I'm just really struck by the interdisciplinarity that is central to all of your fields, right? And as a liberal arts geek, I find that that's part of the texture for me, right? Is this connectedness between disciplines, not siloing knowledge, not siloing people, is really key to building the world that we want, right? And supporting students in building the world that we want. So thanks. As moderator, I get to editorialize a little bit. I appreciate that indulgence. Next, we want to hear from you, right? So that reflection you did before we dove into the first question, invite you to type it in the chat, but don't hit enter yet. We're going to give just a moment for folks to type a question for the panel that you have that is not part of our scripted questions, or something that you're hoping to get out of the session that you want to make sure that we know about. Type that in the chat and then just hold. We're all going to hit enter together on my countdown in about a minute. Okay, so I'm going to be quiet now so that you can type. Okay. Can somebody, if you need more time to type, just give me a quick thumbs up reaction and I'll know that folks need more time. I don't see any. So I'm going to do a countdown. We're all going to hit enter at the same time. And this will create a term that Eli and Andrew introduced me to, a chatterfall, right? So we'll in the chat just be able to see each other's questions kind of simultaneously in a waterfall. So ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, press enter. Awesome. It's so exciting. Thanks for teaching me a new facilitation tool, and thank you all for contributing. I'm going to go ahead and ask the second of our scripted questions, and as we answer, we'll go through these and try to adapt questions so that you get what you want out of the conversation. So panelists, how does embodied practice of community engaged learning enable academic development, student development, and or career development? And we didn't decide who was going to go first, so I'm going to ask for a volunteer. Oh, don't make me call on someone, guys.
I'm sure we're all happy to go first, Catherine. You can call on whoever you want.
Well, you're talking, Christy.
Okay.
So,
I should hear the question again. All the 3 pieces. Will you read me the question?
Okay. Yeah. How does the embodied practice of community engaged learning enable academic development, student development, and or career development? I think
Sure.
cherry pick from those that it's helpful.
Mm-hmm. So I will say for me, academic development and career development are so easy to talk about. So our students, I teach about sustainability. And I teach really broadly about sustainability. Some students coming in hearing I teach about sustainability, they assume that we are going to cover a lot of the natural world, right? Only ecological sustainability. And then getting pushed, some of them getting pushed quite hard to consider issues of equity and justice and social sustainability, economic sustainability, the way that wealth and privilege and race and class impact the inability of our society to move towards sustainability until we dismantle some of these systems. That is a big idea for many students in the class, some of whom are definitely not prepared to tackle those issues taking a sustainability class. So that some of my students, and it is an option in my class, about 3/8 of my students do choose to do community engaged learning. But in the community engaged learning model, students are integrated into different organizations and communities in Seattle, working to push our city and community towards sustainability in a lot of different frames. So students working in food banks, students working in ecological restoration, students working in early childhood education, right? Those students are asked to make the tie through reflection towards sustainability. And it really helps those students academically understand deeply the connections. It is hard to see your own privilege. Many of my students have reflected that until they got into their community engaged learning situation, they couldn't really understand what an early childhood education system would look like that was in a white, wealthy preschool, right? So they didn't really know who was using the food banks and why so many people in Seattle need access to food banks, food justice, right? So concepts we're talking about in class become so much more meaningful to those students who are engaged in community engaged learning. And then those students teach out on the last day of class to all of our students. I mean, it comes up in class conversation throughout course, but they teach out to the other 50 students in the class. So I think all of my students are impacted and benefited by that community engaged learning, even if they themselves don't go that path. And as far as the professional connections, many of our students don't have opportunities or don't take opportunities to get professional experience in the field. And in the field, whatever the field is, having that experience working in community, something for your resume, something for you to discuss in a job interview, that is really a valuable career benefit. So I will pass on to whoever's next.
Well, Christy, are you then integrating like those career connectedness moments? Is that an explicit part of your curriculum? Is it an implicit? Is it something that comes up in office hours? Like, how are you operationalizing that?
Thank you for asking that question. It is not an explicit component of my class, but it is something I talk about inviting students. So it's not a written reflection, but I do invite them to think about that. And I have lots of students come to office hours, and I really encourage students to come to office hours to talk about things that they think are tangential or not related to our courses. And one of the primary things I do in office hours is help students translate. I won't say primary. One of the things that comes up regularly in office hours is help students translate job experience and service experience and community engaged learning experience, internship experience, help them translate all of that into what skills are you developing that you can put on your resume or talk about in a job interview.
I think I'll also add briefly to the career piece. As part of the education series, we usually do a capstone project to include that graduation year. So students have an opportunity to have that site be their sole community engaged site for those number of years throughout the major, or they can do one site for a year, choose another site for another year. But it's all part of this capstone series in order to support the career development and help them think through some of those career paths within higher education, early education, teaching, etc. On my intro slide, you may have seen two photos on my slide. One being hosted an international educators panel. I had colleagues from China, Taiwan, and South Korea to talk about their collegiate experience, grad school experience, and work they do now. And the second photo was a group of Black male mentors that I work with. I lead a leadership seminar at 2 middle schools. So it's thinking about that exposure and opportunity to model and mentor, just access and opportunity for young scholars to definitely be a critical piece of that pathway and trajectory for our students.
can I add to that, Catherine? Is that okay? Eli, were you going to add? I want to make sure. Okay. So the first thing, so building on what Christy and Christian said is the embodied thing. So, you know, I told you earlier I was a dancer. And so like I cannot sit in class all day. I just can't do it. It's really hard for me. And so I know other students are like that too. So part of it is just like get out there and do some stuff and just have a different experience with it and learn things in another way. So one is just sort of all learners, right? Like making sure all learners have an opportunity. And then I think the other part too, we specifically do values clarification in our course for students to kind of make sure that their career goals align with their values, and that they have a deeper sense of what decisions that they're making. We also do like something super practical where we literally take time in sections to write down exactly what they're going to say about their service learning experience, their capstone experience in their resume, and they workshop that together so they feel like they have a product, and students feel like that's really important. And I have graduating seniors, so they're especially heightened about, you know, they're my rainbow birds, they're going to fly away, so they're especially heightened around that. And so I'm like, well, let's work on that anxiety, buds. Let's just get it on some paper. Let's just do that and get it out of the way. And then kind of going back to sort of the embodied question, and I think there's a couple questions in here too. I think Joan's question about saviorism. So one of the ways that we deal with that in the classroom, it's similar to what Christian talked about, is we spend a lot of time talking about internalized oppression and internalized superiority. And I really have them reflect upon sort of what is it about sort of given all this critique. So students might be like, this organization is doing this totally wrong and this is how they should do it. And I'm like, hang on with your internalized superiority, just a moment. Also, you're here in higher ed, so you've got plenty of, you're bought in, paying for it, doing it. So let's take a second to reflect a bit. Look at what you know, what you don't know. How are these two little tigers in our minds, internalized oppression and internalized superiority, making a mess out of what you're saying and doing? So let's tame these tigers. Let's get what's happening and figure out how you want to talk about things differently, because I sure as heck am not going to hear it from a 20-year-old when I've been an ED for 30 years. Like, I'm not. So I want them to be able to create that professional skill to say what they need to say so that they're doing things differently, right? Just like you said, Eli, I don't want to teach you to do things the same way all the time. I want to teach you to do things differently. And I need them to be employed and doing well. So those are the kinds of things, those are some of the ways we deal with sort of the student development piece, the career piece, and also just kind of dealing with the saviorism business. And I had all sort, and Robbie, to your question, who's also my colleague, and Robbie, feel free to add more to this. But I have to say, I had nothing but pushback until people cared about equity. And we know why, right? It was like after the murder of George Floyd, people couldn't look away. And so with all of that, there is an interest convergence, going back to Derek Bell, there's an interest convergence around how looking at issues of equity is to the benefit of mainstream folks in power. And so I'm hopping on. I'm doing my job, just like the rest of our colleagues here. So that's my answer to those few bits of questions there.
Yeah, and I think just to pull on some of those threads, things I've seen all of you do as instructors, and that I think is characteristic of community engaged learning at UW, is finding ways to make some of the implicit parts of curriculum, particularly around identity and privilege, to weave those into your learning goals is really powerful, because then it becomes measurable, right? And you're not necessarily able to assess a student on the progress they make, but you can create structures where you can assess them on their reflectiveness and their openness and their engagement with literature around it. And in every discipline, there are ways to knit that in. And I think that is part of how you get institutional buy-in for your courses. is making some of the implicit stuff explicit, right? Like making it part of what students are assessed on. And I have a lot of thoughts about this. If you want to email and follow up and talk more about that, I'm happy to share some resources or to connect you to colleagues that are not on this call who are doing a good job of that in different disciplines. Because I think that's a big piece of it. I'm curious if if there are questions in the chat that you all as panelists want to address. There are a lot of questions about kind of the hands-on, how do you take community engagement, like the volunteering that students are doing outside the classroom, and really bring it into the classroom, particularly with these lenses of critical reflection. And particularly how we do that on the quarter system, the curse of those of us on the West Coast. When I talk to my friends across the country, I'm like, wait, you have 15 weeks to do this? No, you can't complain, right? So if you want to address any of those things, that seems to be a set of themes, or pick up something else from the chat that you want to talk through.
Well, I wanted to say one thing that has been super valuable to me in my class, and I think that maybe, you know, for folks in public health, this is different in that, like, when in the canon of literature that is written for me to teach from as I'm teaching about farming practices, it's almost all white men, right? And like, it is so hard. And the last few years, there's been this explosion, and it's like so incredibly transformative in my class to be able to be doing work in community engaged learning, you know, which we're doing in the city. But our textbook for the class is, right, this like old book that's like written by like a white guy, and there's, you know, nothing wrong with it. But a few years ago, a wonderful book came out called Farming While Black, written by Leah Penniman, who's a Black woman farming in upstate New York, which is actually where I grew up. So I love this book. But suddenly the book is filled with pictures and actions and people that are much more reflective of the students in my class and the students in the communities they're serving. And so that's like this wonderful place where, like, to bring in the community engaged learning part and be able to have texts and literature that also reflect what the community engagement and the student body, you know, are like in a much more real way. It feels like it's been such a powerful shift for me, being able to adopt this book as my course textbook, and how that's shifted the work of community engaged learning is powerful, right? Because that book has a whole chapter on it about healing from trauma and how relationship with land can be part of healing from trauma. So suddenly I can bring these identities, these intersectional ideas of self into the classroom in ways that I couldn't do when it was a book on how to grow beets written by a white guy who hasn't addressed, you know, healing and doesn't think about that as why you might turn to the land. But that's a central part of why we do urban agriculture and why that's so important to all of us. So I feel like it's a really wonderful time to be engaging in this work. So I would just add that part.
I'll add to the reflective piece of that question. We have a built-in reflection process. We do a series of 3 to 4 community engaged reflection prompts throughout the course of the quarter. So it gives students an opportunity to really assess those goals until they highlight their overall experience. Have there been challenges? Are there additional questions that are left unanswered? Who are the stakeholders that are at that location that are doing the great work and supporting you in that experience? So this is a 6 to 8 week tiered reflection process, and we'll close out the quarter with a letter to yourself, and give students an opportunity to write a letter to the first yourself, highlighting the community engaged experience. If you could go back in time, what would you do differently, and how might you really model and mentor an incoming student to help them think through their community engaged experience as well? So lots of reflection built in throughout the course of the quarter.
I really loved that reflection question, Christian, because like fits right into education. How might you teach this? How might you coach? I might enjoy it more. I might use it. I think it's so good. It's so good.
I also think that the name change from service learning to community engaged learning is in and of itself helpful for students to not approach this from a saviorship model, right? Like my reflections also are asking them, what are you learning from community engaged learning? What skills are you developing through community engaged learning, right? So I'm always trying to ensure that they understand that our community partners are, it is hopeful that the students benefit the community partners. It is also hopeful that the community partners benefit our students, and it is important to acknowledge the extra work embedded in those community partner organizations by taking on community engaged learners. So I ensure, or I try to ensure that that's well understood by our students, that that they don't want to incur added costs to their organization, right? They want to learn as much as they can and be supportive in the way that community engaged organization wants them to be.
And Christy, I don't know if you intended that as an answer to that question about like, how do you build sustainable partnerships? But I think that would be key. And the advice I would offer is acknowledging what community partners bring to the table, right, is really central to community engaged learning as a pedagogy wholly, but being critically reflective about your own practice and how you approach partners, how you set things up, how you talk to students about it, because all of those building blocks, all of those layers really contribute to the experience that community partners have and how they feel valued in the process. And then what you do in the classroom, right? That's really your locus of control. And so thinking about how can you structure reflective assignments, class conversations to support that good partnership that you're doing, partnership work. The other piece, which I don't want to talk about for too long, but is longevity, right? I think when we started, like Christy, your class started 1 quarter a year, right? And now it's offered all 4 quarters a year. That's a huge change in the kinds of partnerships we're able to build and even sustain through the pandemic, right? In terms of consistency for community partners and understanding their cycles of work. So there are some institutional nudges that you can push along, but they take time, right? And I think helping community partners understand our timelines, which are, right, like we're already planning for 2023. I'm still writing 2021 on my checks, but I'm like planning for 2023, right? I still write checks. That tells you something about me, right? So those navigation pieces are huge too. I know we want to give you a chance to do some reflection. So there are lots of amazing questions we didn't get to, but we want you to have some time for action planning. So I'm going to toss back to Christy.
Thank you, Catherine. Can you move to slide? I don't know what slide number it is. That right before that, I think is great. So a great deal of research suggests that we learn better when we engage with others. Yes, and you can engage both in talking or in writing. A great deal of research also suggests, a separate body of research, that we are much more likely to follow through on our vision or hope or goal if we commit to doing something. You can commit in writing or you can commit in conversation, right? So my question for you is to think about, how do some sparks of this conversation excite you, get you thinking about moving forward in your own classes or communities? Catherine, can you go to the next slide? So we want you to take 5 minutes to either write solo or connect in a breakout room to answer or think about any of these questions. So how can you facilitate leadership? It could be student leadership or organizational leadership towards equitable, sustainable economies. How can you provide more opportunities for reflection on identity, privilege, equity, and sustainability into your classrooms or communities? How can you partner with community organizations effectively to help you do this? And what can you commit to doing in your class or community right now? So this quarter, or if you're on, so this semester or next quarter. And I'm going to open up some breakout rooms. You just have 5 minutes in these breakout rooms. Let me find my breakout room tab. Here we go with 30 of them. I am going to open 7 rooms. Please join whatever room until there's about 4 people. And once there's 4 people, join a different room. If you prefer to remain solo, you can just write on your own and then we'll come back and chat about it. So you're going to have just 5 minutes in breakout rooms, and they have Oh, it looks like I'm, hang on. Hang on a minute. I have to start this breakout room over again. Here we go. Let participants choose rooms. Okay, so you can go ahead and join a room until there's 4 participants in that room and then chat. That would be awesome. And we'll come back at 12:09 or maybe 12:10. Does anyone need assistance joining a breakout room? If you choose to, but don't know how, please let me know. Like a few folks have joined. Do the rest of you prefer to write or are you having trouble joining? Great.
Christy, do you want us to join rooms?
I don't think I think it'll be better if students reflect on their, or participants reflect on their own. Oh, but Eli joined a room. Feel free, whatever. I have no attachment. Okay, it's 12:09. I'm going to press the close all rooms, and I think that people will have about a minute to finish up. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good discussion in your breakout room, and the writers, I hope you had time for written reflection. We do just have a few more minutes of our session, and I would love to finish up the session by hearing from you. So what are some ways you can facilitate leadership towards equitable, sustainable economies, provide more opportunities for reflection on privilege, identity, and equity and sustainability in your classrooms or communities? Or how can you partner with community organizations more effectively? And this is exactly what I do in my classes. I say, I'm just going to sit here and smile at you until someone is willing to chat. So I hope you don't make me sit here and smile at you for all 5 minutes. Thank you, David, for raising your hand. I would
Yeah,
love to
I'll
hear
get it
what you.
started for sure. I don't want you to have to sit there and you know, get a crease in your upper lips. Okay, so basically, how can we, you know, move towards leadership and sustainability? And it's simple and it's in our own actions. And it's unpretentious action in the form of looking at past ways without looking down upon them, but taking from them. Instead of saying that, okay, you know, industry, we're making all this waste, you know, we make all the money, we make the decisions, and we're going to impose these restrictions down on, you know, upon, you know, lower communities. But that's wrong. We should be looking at those communities and how they've been sustainable for many years because they had to be sustainable. And we should be looking at equity from within and drawing examples from communities of how they've been able to do this for a long time.
Mhm. So what I heard from you is thinking, trying to move towards sustainability, not from a top-down model, right? Saying right now, who has the most power in industry and political leaders? We maybe can't expect industry and political leaders to make a lot of changes, top-down changes towards sustainability unless unless we have citizen and demands, people demanding change, and also change in ourselves. So where can we look to communities who have more sustainable practices? How can we implement such practices in our own organizations, in our own lives? And how can we move towards ensuring more sustainable practices are happening on a more widespread level? Okay. Thank you, David. Who is going to share one more feedback? David, were you in the small group that chatted? Group 6?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Anyone else in group 6 want to share some part of your conversation?
I can share. So
Thanks, Rhea.
yeah, David was awesome. Hearing that conversation and connection with Eli and the book that is used in the course as well. We kind of mentioned too, I was in another breakout room with the networking group earlier, and we were talking about how to reach out, how to kind of get people to these kinds of spaces, because often the people who need to hear these conversations aren't in the room. How do you do that? So with our digitized age, like social media, that double-edged sword, but it is a really effective way to garner public interest. Reaching out to people that you really want to know and want to be a part of these conversations, and kind of being unrelentless and but also, you know, not offensive, and reaching out and trying to bring them into your space is really helpful too. And then we kind of went on this topic of building community and how do you do that sustainably as well. But I think getting over the anxieties that come, the imposter syndromes that come, or the fears that come from people saying no is a huge thing that I need to work on personally in my role as an educational outreach coordinator. And but also just fighting for what you think is actually going to make a beneficial change. So that's kind of one thing we've mentioned.
Thank you, Rian. So many important pieces there, right? So one of them being how do you get people in the room, right? So the people who most need to work on this may not be compelled to be in this conversation. So how do we ensure that everyone and all of our students have access to these important conversations, right? We cannot build a more sustainable society if we don't have the people who have identities with more privilege learning
Yeah.
from and hearing about and reflecting on that privilege, reflecting on systemic oppression and what they can do to help build a society that's more equitable. So I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And
Also,
I
the piece
wanted to
about
add
social
one
media.
piece.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I wanted to add they said finding common ground is the most important way to establish those kinds of connections, because there's so many diverse backgrounds we all come from, but finding ways that we relate, like, food and drink, water, the health of our ecosystems, do tie us back together. And yeah, just finding common ground in those really creative ways too is a great way to level the playing field. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you, Rian. I will say, actually, Catherine, I'm not looking at the slides, if you're not sharing the slide with our email addresses, will you pop that up? So just please feel free to contact any of us. We would love to be in touch. And the last thing I have to say is that as educators, we do have a great deal of privilege in the system of the universities. I teach a course, actually all my courses have what UW is called a natural world requirement. So students earn a distribution requirement about understanding how Earth systems work. Bringing diversity and equity content into those courses is powerful, right? Students aren't taking those courses because of the diversity and equity content, and they are being served it anyway. So we can incorporate this content into all of our courses and should. Thank you. I think we are out of time. Catherine, do you have a closing moment?
No, I mean, I think you're just like, you're serving it anyway, right? Like, even if it's not what people come for, like for me, that links back to this bigger theme of regenerative economies, right? That like finding ways to make the work embodied and connected and interdisciplinary and challenging students, right? Those are the building blocks for building the economies that we want, right? So if I'm going to put a bow on it, that's how I'm going to try to do it. Thank you all so much for your time. I shared the slide deck. We'll also try to email it out to you, since I know it's hard to hold on to things after Zoom chat. I always open the tab and then forget why